Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Tactics Board. We've had the FA Cup, we've had a rare couple of midweeks without any championship action, but Norwich City are back in the league this weekend when they take on Sheffield United at Bramall Lane. It shouldn't be an easy one by any means. Of course, the Blades chasing promotion at the moment, and although there is something going in Norwich's favour in terms of the injury crisis that Chris Wilder's team have had to deal with in recent weeks, they will be confident of an opportunity to take 3 points, to add 3 points to the board as they chase promotion back to the Premier League. You know the drill. Here on Tactics Board, we're going to take a look at my predicted starting 11 for the game. Then we're going to look at how it might play out and Sheffield United's strengths and weaknesses. And then we're going to come on to Matej Jurasek, the name on every Norwich fan's lips at the moment. But we're going to start with that starting 11. So without further ado, here's the team I think Johannes Hoffball will pick to go to Yorkshire. So I've gone for Angus Gunn in goal, Jack Stacey at right back, Shane Duffy and Callum Doyle in the centre of defence, with Ben Krizeni at left back, Kenny McLean, Emiliano Marcondes and Amankwa Forson in midfield, with Ante Sienat on the right, Lewis Dobbin on the left and Josh Sargent through the middle up front. Now, it feels like a team that Torup shouldn't need to make too many changes to. Of course, before that damaging FA Cup defeat, they did get 10 points from a possible 12. But with some injuries playing a bit of a role and this being quite a different game to some of those that they had around the festive period, I think there is a call for Torup to make maybe a couple of changes. And one of those that I've predicted is Jack Stacey at right back. I think these more physical away games where Norwich maybe have to do a little bit more back foot defending, those games have tended to suit Jack Stacey a little bit better than Kellen Fisher. And with Ante Sienat, my prediction for right wing, and obviously the fact that he likes to cut in, I think it makes more sense for Stacey to be in that sort of overlapping role when Norwich do want to counter quickly. Of course, he's got that athleticism to do that as well. And with Sheffield United being quite direct, I think, at times in their approach, Stacey probably is slightly better aerially than Kellen Fisher. And I've said this multiple times this season that I think Fisher will end up being the game in, game out, week in, week out option for Norwich. But this season, where Torup is sort of changing between those two options, I think this is the sort of game that he tends to pick Jack Stacey for. In midfield, I've gone for Amankwa Forson to retain his place from that FA Cup defeat. And although it maybe wasn't as headline-grabbing as that 2-goal salvo against Coventry, it was another decent performance, another step in the right direction, it seemed, for Forson. And of course, he was back in that more natural position in midfield, having spent some time on the right wing when he was last in the team, or last had a proper stint in the team. And with Marcelino Nunez and his hamstring injury, I should stress this is being recorded before Johannes Hoffball's press conference, so we don't know a timeline on that. But knowing the history of hamstring injuries and how they usually pan out, it feels like, speaking at this moment in time, it would be fairly optimistic to say that he'll be fit for this one. So I've got Forson in midfield, and then up front is a bit of a choice for Torup to make, because he said that Josh Sargent could probably start one of these two games against Sheffield United or Leeds. And although you'd say that he could come on as a substitute in this Sheffield United game, gain some more minutes, and then eventually build up to a start against Leeds, and I think that's definitely a possible, I'd say the fact that Sargent has a full week to prepare for this one probably gives him the advantage. It also feels, to be honest, like a slightly more winnable one for Norwich. And don't get me wrong, they go in as serious underdogs to both games. But given Sheffield United's problems with injuries, some of their recent form, and also just the fact that Leeds look a cut above everyone else, to be honest, I think this is the one where you'd maybe want as many of your best players on the pitch as possible. And if you're going with him up front, then it feels likely that Ante Sienat will be out on the right. Of course, we'll come on to Jurasek, but of course he isn't available until the start of February. I think the 3rd of February is when Norwich can officially register him. So he's not an option on the left, or on the right, sorry. Cade Gordon has gone back to Liverpool. So it does feel like Sienats will be the best option if Sargent does start up front. And although that could happen in the Leeds game, I think either way it will be that combination. And then Lewis Dobbin on the left, I think makes sense given he started against Brighton, did fairly well, and of course Paul Hyacinth is still 5 games away from returning from his suspension. So that's the team I've gone for. It's quite a tricky one, so I could have got a couple wrong, but either way, it'll be interesting when that team news drops ahead of kickoff at Bramall Lane. Now on to the hosts, and although it feels like they're actually doing it even more effectively, not much has changed tactically from them since Norwich met them at Carrow Road. I think it was in August. It was obviously fairly early on in the season. It was a good performance from Norwich. They maybe even deserved more and, of course, had the lead through Josh Sargent's opener. I feel like Sheffield United's new arrivals or summer arrivals have had a bit more time to bed in, to get used to each other. Everyone's sort of come closer together, and as the season's gone on, they've got better and better, really. So I think it's a different test to what Norwich faced back then, but tactically it's fairly similar. They're still quite direct. They still want to play the fairly long balls up to their striker and then have those talented players in and around them, specifically Gustavo Hamer and Callum O'Hare, sort of pick up on those second balls and give them chances to create opportunities really in that final third. So Norwich will need to deal with a physical battle, and in that sense, with Shane Duffy and Callum Doyle, or maybe Jose Cordoba thrown into that mix, you'd say that they do have the players to cope with that physical threat. They do have aerially some pretty decent defenders, but it's also about that threat in behind and some of those players who can run from midfield, who can run beyond the striker and make the most of space in behind, because of course Norwich want to play with a high line, and that centre-back duo, although they have done pretty well in recent performances, I think Duffy especially in a defensive sense, they aren't great at defending when the ball goes in behind them, and they maybe don't have those natural attributes in terms of pace or athleticism. So if Sheffield United can get some knock-ons and they can win a couple of aerial balls, then when that ball goes in behind, that's when they can really create danger. They will be quite narrow, so that's a challenge for the fullbacks. And although I said that Stacey will be good for that physical aerial approach, I think positionally that would be a challenge, especially for him and Ben Krezene, who are both pretty chalk on the boots fullbacks. They like being out wide, they like being in that channel and running down the line, but defensively they might have to tuck in to deal with those wingers who can play fairly narrow, and Sheffield United can get quite narrow defensively as well. So I suppose in that offensive sense, Norwich will look to exploit the space out wide, and those fullbacks have a chance to do that. But defensively, they'll have to tuck in and maybe do that slightly more than they're used to. I suppose if you look at the team selection, that's something in Fisher's favour. But I still think that Stacey probably has the advantage aerially, and maybe that's why Torop would choose him. But also, if Doyle ends up at left-back and Jose Cordoba comes in at centre-back, you'd say that maybe numerically they have a few more of those aerial players who can win those physical duels, and that might be an advantage. So it'll be interesting to see how the team selection plays into that, but definitely a different test for Norwich, because although in the Championship you do end up facing a lot of those more physical teams, there aren't many teams sort of towards the top end that play that way these days, and Sheffield United are one of those. So they can do it really, really effectively and with quality on the ball, and it might be quite a tough test for Norwich if they can't press high and stop some of those accurate long balls, testing their centre-backs and getting the ball in behind. So it's about everyone in the team contributing defensively and offensively, as of course you'd say that most teams will need to if they want to get any sort of points return from games against Sheffield United. So not an easy one, but with those wide areas, and also if Norwich can move the ball quickly on the floor, you'd say there are still some areas that they can get at them at their best. On to the man we've all been waiting for, and that is Matej Jurasek, of course, announced as a Norwich City player yesterday, and although he won't be able to play for them until February, there is, of course, plenty of content around that and plenty of anticipation around what he'll bring to the team. I will start, I'm afraid, with a plug, because our Insight video is on the channel now, and tells you a lot about him, and a lot of what I'm going to explain tactically is based on that. So I'd recommend going and watching that if you have a chance after this. But mainly, I think Jurasek is a sort of technical player, somebody who likes to take defenders on and run at goal and be direct. And although he maybe doesn't have that physicality of, sort of a typical direct winger like an Ono Hernandez or maybe even an Adama Traore, where they can get past players with their physical strength, Jurasek does have the pace, he does have the mentality to create goals and score goals. He's got a fantastic left foot. He's very good at sort of squeezing into small spaces, taking players on, scoring from distance, finishing chances that maybe you don't expect him to, and things like that. So Norwich will want to get him on the ball to try to hurt opposition teams. And I think when you think about how they play at the moment, he very much does fit into that. They want to play possession-based football. They want to be proactive and attack as much as possible. And when you're against a low block or you're trying to create chances against teams that sit in, a player like that who can take players on, who can force the issue a little bit in that situation, is a really positive one. He also cuts in a lot. He really, really does come onto that left foot. In fact, you'd say maybe almost to a fault, he's reluctant to use his right foot. And actually, that's interesting when you consider the fact that Kellen Fisher does look like being the long-term solution for Norwich, and he's an inverted option. So where right now you'd say that Jurasek's skills might be better for somebody like Jack Stacey to play on that right-hand side with him, because he can go on the outside and make the most of that space created. It feels like there will be some management needed from Torup if he wants Jurasek and Fisher to play together, which you feel he maybe will do going forward. And maybe there will need to be some sort of tactical adaptation to that, because if you have both of them coming inside, that leaves a lot of space out wide that isn't being exploited, and it also condenses the pitch and maybe takes away some space for teammates in that way. So I think that's something for Torup to manage, but obviously he's somebody who Ben Napper has identified as somebody who fits the system, and I think he does look like somebody who on the ball can contribute a lot. One of the main concerns I'd have, and from speaking to various people at the check end about what that looks like and maybe where the issues are for Jurasek, it feels like defensively he could be contributing a little bit more. His work rate could be slightly better coming back into his own half. That isn't something that he was especially good at Slavia Prague, but of course at 21 there is time for him to develop and to improve, and I'm sure, well, he and the coaching staff back themselves to improve him to a point where he can also defend pretty well. And although obviously that will never be his main job, that is something that Torup demands from everyone on the pitch. They want everyone to press really well. They want everyone to defend well and contribute defensively. And that's something actually that even when Borja Sainz was scoring all of those goals earlier in the season, Torup was still mentioning and still talking about. I think what goes in Jurasek's favour defensively is the fact that Norwich always pretty much, when they've got the chance, want to push forward and defend by pressing and defend high up in the opposition half. So it's not like he needs to do slightly more of that unnatural part of his game and run backwards as soon as the ball's lost. He's somebody who wants to be proactive, wants to score goals, wants to get the ball in advanced positions. And pressing does feel like a slightly more natural way of doing that defensively than when you are forced to run straight back when you lose the ball and be part of a low block and maybe do something that doesn't come quite so naturally. So I think that could suit Jurasek, but maybe he does still need to make improvements defensively to fulfill his potential, which it does sound like is pretty significant, even though he's struggled for form a little bit in the last few months and maybe the last couple of years at Slavia. But when he does get into the team, it should be very interesting. Even before then, there's plenty of drama to unfold. And of course, we'll be at Bramall Lane to bring you minute-by-minute coverage of the game against Sheffield United. So pinkun.com/subscribe is the place to go if you haven't already. I'll see you again on Tactics Board before that Leeds game, when hopefully the mood is very positive after a surprise result against Sheffield United. Right, I'll see you then. Thank you very much for joining me. And yeah, pinkun.com/subscribe.